I realise I'm up against Jordi Jimenez from Catalonia, so thank you all for sticking with this. I hope we find it interesting. Sorry, yeah, exactly, everybody goes.
There's not a room for Jordi,
This might feel a bit exotic, and certainly everybody's going, what?
Sorry,
CGEM.
I just realised it's the same one we've seen.
Ah, yeah, you've seen it. Yeah. Now you see, this is what happens. Yeah. I did a preview of this last week in Wales, so that's my Welsh audience leaving. That might tell you that you should all leave, of course. But anyway, I'll explain what this is as we go through. So that's me. There's lots of familiar faces in the room, so you know who I am. Former GP. I've been doing this for far, far too long. That's why I look so young and healthy. Been doing openEHR for a long, long time as well. But I'm here as freshEHR Clinical Informatics. That's my little consultancy company. And amongst other things, we've worked with some of the projects you've seen, Kalinska with Patrick's team, the One London project. We did the data modelling and the mapping behind the scenes. So we're kind of specialist clinical informaticians. And we do some video trainings, it's really, really cheap and fantastic quality. So you're very welcome to sign up. Anyway, what's this CGEM thing? Well, the headline is, I'll stand out of the way, it'll be easier. The headline is, it stands for Contextual Global Events and Managed Process. Rather pompously, I've called it a semantic framework because I didn't really know what else to call it. The more prosaic is finding compositions. And this is a little example of the UCP data set. So what you're about to hear and see is how we tried to tackle the problem of how do we start to construct a more complex data set, and where do the compositions go? Where does the data fit into different compositions? And we all know this. It's hugely messy, and the more you get into this space, you just realise how much more messy it is. And just at the moment, we're literally, Annette and I from Tieto are battling our way through migrating, or doing a test migration from the Take Care system in Region Stockholm, one of Patrick's areas, into openEHR, and it is mind-bogglingly scary and complex. And this is our world. And this is the world I think you wouldn't be here if at some level you didn't believe in this vision of somehow a patient-centric record or records. Separate the apps from the data, organise the primary patient information. So we're not, by primary I mean the primary source of record, not a copy or an extract, but as the data is captured in real time from clinical people or other services, it is put in as much as we can a common primary record. And this is just about coherence as well as availability. Some kinds of information, and I'll enlarge on that in a bit, need to be coherent. You don't want multiple copies of your CPR decision. Should I be resuscitated or not? You really, really do not want that distributed across 10 different applications. And it comes to the point, is that going to synchronize? Somebody updates it here, will that synchronize across the community? So when the ambulance rocks up and you're having a heart attack, maybe you're a young guy and you want to be resuscitated, but maybe you've got advanced dementia, and that's really not what you want to happen. So having some parts of this data set really need to be recorded very accurately, and you can't do that in this kind of distributed environment, I don't believe, safely. And I think we've got a lot of things really right in openEHR. So I've been working in this space for a long time, and delighted to have worked with people like Heather Leslie and Sebastian Garda. So I worked for Ocean for a little while, was heavily involved in developing the methodology and some of the tooling. And I think we've got this bit nailed. Now, I was having a discussion over lunch about, I don't think we've got it completely nailed, but I think we've got a lot of really good, probably as best as anybody else has done in terms of getting that level of archetype components, some kind of throughput. Now, I know everybody's frustrated about the throughput, but that's about resourcing. I think the methodology is right, and we just need to ramp it up, a few tweaks here and there, and we're doing way better than anyone else in this sort of space, given the resources that we've had. This is the bit that I think is a bit more difficult, because traditionally in openEHR, that's kind of been left to the individual projects. How do you define your templates? How do you build, how do you join together the little Lego blocks to construct the template? Well, we kind of said, well, that depends, It depends on the situation, it depends on the market, it depends on the budget you have, the project timescale. So there's a lot of, well, that depends going on in this template. But for us, or for me particularly, every time we hit a new project, we were having that, it was a that depends conversation, and quite a lot of brain work going on to try to analyze the use case and figure out what the templates and therefore the composition should be. So one of the ideas, I'm sure some of you will know this, but one of the ideas, the really powerful ideas that is in openEHR is this idea of what's called composition category in the openEHR reference model. And it recognizes that there are different life cycles of data in healthcare systems. So at the bottom, we've got events. So an encounter, a lab test report, a collection of vital signs by a nurse. Sort of fire and forget. You collect the data, that's it, off it goes again. You don't make a change to that document unless somebody's made an error, in which case you do update it. You replace that really nicely, but it's every time you have another encounter, you have another composition. These are event compositions. At the other end, we've got persistent compositions, where by design you say, I want only one copy of this document, so I'm going to upversion it every time. CPR decision, that's a really good example. I want one copy of my CPR decision, so rather than creating multiple instances of that document and relying on the most recent date, we will deliberately overwrite, reversion it, so what the system sees and queries on is always the most recent one. And in the middle, we recognized a little bit late in the day that we needed something that we called episodic to handle those things that are true for a period of time, but you may have to drop again. So let's say something like an orthopedic journey, where you collect some information which has some it's longitudinal for the course of the patient's orthopedic journey. Maybe they have a left hip done, but then they get better, and maybe they then have to have the right hip done, so then you have another episode. And these are very condition specific. But this felt, we've got to bring this in front of clinical people, and this just felt a bit too much openEHR-like. But these are all the different kinds of openEHR systems, and they're all over the place. We've got registries, we've got things that are like close to full EHRs as they're doing. We've got the care planning stuff we're doing in London. We're being asked to deal with everything, and that, for me, that's been the privilege. So I started knowing GP data systems and GP data, but I've been exposed to the sheer insanity that is in every system around, and it is insanity. People don't grasp just how crazy it is out there. So come back to one of the questions we were asked with the One London project. So this was this nice little image was developed by an architect working for the broader One London program when they started thinking about care planning. So there was this vision of, we want to have some kind of system that tries to make sense of all these different little care plans, CPR status, preferred place of care, about me, allergies, all overlapping, right? All overlapping in terms of the data that they were capturing, sometimes correctly, sometimes not. How do we make sense of that? How do we start to think about it? And the other thing that comes into this always, and I think is really interesting, is the idea, and I take my Welsh colleagues that have just left, I actually got this from them. They talk about tactical modelling versus strategic modelling. So this is a reality. Every time you go in, you may go in with a strategic, we are trying to do this right. We're going to try to do this the openEHR way. We're going to use all the international archetypes we can. It never works like that, because you may have a strategic mentality, but the project timescales or the budget or the customer requirements means you've got to deliver something. So you always have to be prepared to go tactical. And one of the tactical things that people often say is, I just want you to give me that form. I've got a paper form, it might even be an e-form. I just want you to replicate that. I understand that, I can show that to my clinical community. So that's very often part of what we were being asked to work with as a start point. So, slight sideways discussion. we got involved in a project during lockdown, which was to support care homes who were having to, you all remember the situation, you know, care staff in care homes, very often not medically trained, deteriorating, usually elderly patients, no face-to-face support. They weren't going to get a medic or a doctor coming anywhere near them. So could we construct a little app that helped them collect some information that they could then pass on electronically to an out-of-hour service or an emergency department or whatever? So that was the ask. And the client was familiar with SBAR. Who knows what SBAR is? A bit. So SBAR is a sort of medical recording framework that came from, I think, originally the US military, the medics. As a GP, I'm used to a thing called SOAP, Subjective Objective Assessment Plan. Larry Wheat stuff, for those who you know. I'd heard of SBAR, but I wasn't really familiar with it. And they said, we want you to design this around SBAR, which stands for Situation, Background, Assessment, Response. So you can think, you know, as an immediate responder, you turn up, you know, with somebody who's been shot or injured, and you wonder what happened. He's been shot, or a bomb went off, or whatever's happened. You need to contextualize the situation. That's what you need to know. What's happened, briefly, what's happened. Then, if you're lucky, you've got a little bit of time to reflect and ask a bit more information, you know. And in a non-military situation, that would be, okay, tell me a bit more about this patient. You know, what's their background medical information? Are there any allergies? Are there any medication? Okay, now we've got that, then we can do an assessment, we make some sort of decision, and then we do something about it. And as we were starting to build the templates for this, I'm going, you know what, there's a pattern here that's actually mapping this kind of episodic thing. And you know what, this actually works much better than SOAP. So when I was a working GP, it always bothered me, SOAP didn't fit the way we work electronically. Because SOAP assumes you know nothing. You know, you're coming as a clean, okay, I'm going to take your history, I'm going to examine you, I'll make a decision and whatever. It doesn't have a pause where you can go and look at the past records, because you never had the past records, particularly in hospital care. So for me, it was always missing something. I thought, that's it, you know? I need to orientate myself, pause, hopefully have a look through the previous medical history to get more stuff, and then I can start to make a proper. I thought that's much better as a human way of thinking about it. But you know what? That's starting to fit some of the ways we want to model our data. So we started internally talking about SBAR, not as the SBAR medical process, but as a way of thinking about how to bundle up the data into different templates and compositions. When we started to talk about that with other people, very quickly we realized it was a stupid thing to call it SBAR, because then they immediately thought you're actually talking about SBAR, you know, the medical assessment process. So we decided, therefore, to rename this as CGEM. So we've now got contextual situations, so we kept the SBAR in there, global background, event assessment, and managed response. So what's this? So, starting from the top, contextual is information that's closely associated with a particular condition or a situation. So that could be an acute admission, or it could be sickle cell disease, or it could be diabetes, or it could be an orthopedic journey. Because we think in the pattern, you have to manage some of that data very contextually. You have to control it, and you need some precision that belongs to that situation. Some of it, however, in fact, as you go through it, an awful lot of it is what we think of as global. And that is stuff that is true regardless of which condition or situation the patient is in. What's your current medication? What allergies do you have? What's your CPR decision? Who are your personal contacts? What are your behavioural challenges? What are your communication challenges? A long, long, long list. They tend to be, once you get away from meds and allergies and problems, they tend to be things that are more socially important or important in the care of a person, but they can be really challenging. If the care staff, if I have dementia and I'm admitted with a heart problem, and the care staff do not understand how to manage my behavioural challenges that are throwing out because of their dementia, they're going to chew up huge amounts of usually nursing resource. So this is, it feels like soft stuff. It's just being nice to patients, but it doesn't. It has big resource implications for the staff, and this applies to people at the end of their life, but it also applies to people with learning disability and neurodevelopmental disorders like autism. So that's the global, and then there's the event, which is the information recorded over time, you know, the lab tests, the encounters, and whatever. I'll come back to managed response in a bit. So, how do we actually use this? So here's a real example. It's a bit slightly faked example, but it's not. So we're also working with the Cancer Christie Cancer Hospital. And their challenge actually is that their existing EPR that they built, home-built EPR, is very forms-based. Right? And part of the UI is quite nice, but the forms don't talk to each other. So each form captures data and they do this sort of copy and paste between. So we're trying to help them tease that out. And this is where we start to use it. So we go, right, so there's the form, and we now say, right, let's CGEM it. All right, so we CGEM it, and we come up with, hey, these things in orange, these are the global ones. Here's the stuff that's specific to the cancer journey, the primary disease site, treatment status, current stage. That's just about this cancer and this cancer journey. If the patient is unfortunate enough to get cancer again, that's a completely different journey and a completely different set of data. Then we've got, you know, they turn up at a review clinic. This is just a review clinic. You're going to record their current symptoms on the day, their weight, and their current clinical frailty scale as an encounter. And then I'll come back to the planned actions in a second. What we think is really important is that we give the clinicians their form back. Because I think it's important that people still can work contextually and record the information they need to collect to do their job and not get swamped by a giant application. So what we're saying is, we'll give you your form, but actually behind the scenes, we're going to split this data out. It's not your problem, this is our internal informatics problem, into probably a series of event assessments, maybe a couple of contextual templates, one to capture the cancer care plan and one to capture the cancer treatment plan. And then there's a whole bunch of things that would be in global background. And we were listening this morning about Charlotte Refsum and the national record. That's the thing where I think that's what should be in the start point of what should be in the national record. The things that are about the patient and not contextual to the situation. So, when have we used it in reality? We have used this behind the scenes in the UCP, and a couple of my colleagues from London UCP team are here. So here's an example of a global, which is living arrangements. Where do you live? What's your house like? Who else is in the house? More detailed stuff that we added in recently, which is getting into almost local authority housing, repairs and that sort of stuff, which came from the clinical audience. But here's the end-of-life care plan, which is contextual. So that's information. There's prognosis details, preferred place of care, and we have a little problem list, which is really about the problems that are relevant to their end of life. They may have many, many other problems, but this is what's led you. This is what you're dying from, to be blunt. So that's what happens behind the scenes. Now the clinicians, or at least your average clinician, is not aware of what we're doing under the scenes. This is hidden behind a UI which blends these together. We've given the better guys a real challenge in making this work, because fundamentally when you commit one of their forums in London, we're actually submitting several compositions and reading them back in again. So there's been some interesting discussions, and we certainly learned some lessons about how to maybe do this a little better. And I think the main lesson is, if you're going to do this, don't chunk up disparate ideas. So one of the things that we realized we've done wrong is that we chunked up prognosis with end of life. But of course, prognosis is really not about end of life. And it's not about any one condition, it's an overall thing. So prognosis probably lives in the global space. Yeah, so how do we use it? We use it all the time now internally. We're starting to teach that to people as a good way of starting to answer that question. Okay, how do we shape the templates? And I think increasingly, we'll be able to point to a standard set of templates, particularly in the global space, that we just reuse all the time. And a lot of the new work will be actually in the contextual one as we go through all these very specific cancer journeys, very specific diabetes, orthopedics, or whatever. The events bit, it's pretty easy. That's labs and encounters. The managed response was an interesting one. And you may have covered, let me just step back a couple of, oops, that's not what I meant to do. Step back a couple of slides. Yeah, so here's the, this just it's always a challenge. So there's two check boxes, radio buttons, sorry. One says refer to MDT, refer to multidisciplinary care team, and the other is seen by key worker. And the reason we separated out this kind of response in open air terms, instructions and actions, is it's usually quite tricky to know what people actually want. In this case, we said, do you want this actually to kick off a full referral? You know, do you want us to put an instruction and action cycle behind this little checkbox? Still give you a checkbox. Maybe we can automate the rest of the process. And they said, yes, yeah, that'd be great, that'd be fantastic. And I said, well, what about seen by key worker? Do you want us to refer to the key worker? No. We just need to record that as a fact, right? We're not triggering any process that's outside the scope of what we're trying to do. And so the R bit sort of doesn't fit, but it was a nice way of partitioning off these tricky questions about, you know, are you really trying to do something clever with processing? We kind of leave that to the end, and we get back to that bit, and then we can decide how to partition that. Okay, and basically that is that. So. So I have left a bit of time for questions because some of these ideas are a bit mad. Now I should say we've developed this within freshEHR, but we're sharing it very widely. It's not intended to be proprietary anyway. If we're clever, we'll probably try to sneak an academic paper and get to Taiwan next year.
Okay. You said that there are global information about the patient, and when you when you fill the form and commit, then you rewrite the global information.
Yeah. We overwrite it. So
they are automatic field from if you have already this information. Is that
yes, it would be pre-populated when the clinician opens up the screen. So for instance, in the London UCP. That particular
recommitted with another version.
Recommitted with another version over the top, yeah. And the persistent composition, we tell the system this is a persistent composition.
Yes.
Keep rewriting it. Keep.
So you delete the previous version?
No, well, it's a logical delete. It's just there. It's there, but it's in the stack, further down the stack. And there's ways of digging it out if you really want to, but the default query mechanism will just find the current version. There you go.
Yeah. So I don't know if I understood well, so the idea is that the technicians themselves still use the same system that they were used to, but now it's also being put into an operator too? Or
Yeah. So this is a generic idea that applies.
Yeah.
So, but we use that under the hood in London. Yeah. And to be honest, colleagues knew that we were a bit of what we were doing, but I don't think the clinical audience had no clue. We didn't put this in front of them. In the Christie, it's a little bit different because they are a community that have built some of their own stuff. So they have a bit more clinical understanding, and we wanted to engage them more. So we're telling them about this and explaining to them because we want them to be self-sufficient in this over time.
Yeah, I can see this as a way of getting all systems into the OpenEHR workflow, because you get this kind of analysis and then start. Yeah, people they have even to know that it's there, right? It's like happening in the code.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm from Basel, so we're kind of new to the model line. So we really have been looking into the whole thing about the category attribute that you introduced, and so we found some conflicting information on the discourse. So are you actually using it? So are you setting the category attribute to event or assistant?
No.
Depending on it?
There's always somebody asks an awkward question. So there is an attribute in OpenEHR called category that is settable, and it's in archetypes, and we should be using that. And maybe I don't want to. It's a long conversation. Is we should be using that for various historical reasons and reasons of tooling. We're not using that. We're actually setting it separately, but that's an issue that we need to just tidy up some of the tooling so it supports it better, particularly in templates. So we can't set that in templates, so we're synthesizing that rather than using it. I'm more than happy to tell you what we're doing.
And follow-up question. So if we look at the CGEM, then would you agree that the contextual is basically the episodic type?
Yes.
And
Yes.
the global background is persistent type?
Yes.
And then the assessment would be event?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But it gets a little bit subtle because you could say, I think one of the reasons we want to slightly separate the conceptual idea from the episodic is you could say, well, diabetes, that's a lifelong condition. Maybe we should just make that, you don't stop having diabetes and then have it again. You do get admitted and then you get discharged and then you get admitted. You do have a left hip and a right hip and a left hip revision. So, I don't think it's an absolute straight path between episodic and, our episodic and connection, but it's close, it's very close. Cool. Excellent. How long are we supposed to have?
You've got 4 minutes.
Oh, 4 minutes. Oh,
I just want to ask you questions, if not, we'll get these done a bit earlier.
Cool. Thank you, everyone, for your attention. And,